So when we speak of Tantric perspective, when the term Shiva does not correspond to that Hindu trinity, and I'm saying that only so that for your future studies, and you read somewhere, and then Shiva term would be used in relation to that trinity, and that may sound confusing. But if you read anything Tantric, if you read anything in relation to Tantra, or even if you read anything more modern, let's say, when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, in his Science of Creative Intelligence, which eventually was minimized to the use of Sanskrit, every term was replaced with as precise equivalent or combination of words in English. The term Shiva was also used only in relation to the absolute, to the ultimate. All thoughts of Indian philosophy operate with the term categories, they're known as tattvas. Tattva can be translated as thatness, suchness. It's simply that, tattva. Whereas classical schools of Indian philosophy operate with 24 tattvas, the Kashmir Shaivism breaks some of them into more specific tattvas, and the total number of them is 36. With the first tattva, with the first category, as pure category, known as Shiva. And the second tattva is obviously Shakti. So, what is Shakti and what is Shiva? In this case, Shakti is also a pure category. And we're not going to go into the intricacies and into the depth of the Tantric philosophy. For the purpose of our discourses, what would be more preferable if you have a clearer understanding of the relationship between the absolute and the relative. This will be by far more conducive for all your future studies and inquiries. So it is with that in view that we are speaking of the relationship between Shiva and Shakti. So who is Shiva here and who is Shakti here? Shiva is awareness. It's pure awareness, pure silence, absolute. And Shakti, as the very term, if we are to translate the term Shakti, it's power. And it is Shiva's power. So Shakti is not another category, let alone separate category. Shakti is Shiva. And Shiva is Shakti. And in the Tantric cosmology, it is spoken of as Shiva and Shakti in perfect equilibrium. They are, if you will, and that's how tradition often speaks of, because Tantric tradition freely uses worldly analogies as metaphors. So the Shiva Shakti here, in such profound state of absorption one into the other, they are in a state of complete union, absorbed in that intimate act, that there is no way to tell them apart. In other words, they're in perfect equilibrium. And yet it is Shiva and Shakti. But then everything that throbs and moves, it's all due to the power of Shakti towards manifestation. If we are to use these other two very helpful and indispensable in all Tantric teachings, all of them without exception, terms as Prakasha and Vimarsha. Prakasha and Vimarsha stands for luminosity of awareness and the power of being aware of itself. So it's Prakasha, that which is luminous, which illumines everything, and Vimarsha, that which is aware of its own luminosity. So in other words, it's not two but one, although that oneness here is articulated through the dyadic relationship. It is through the power of self-awareness that awareness is aware of itself. It is through the power that awareness can be aware of its own luminosity. Otherwise, there will be no possibility for awareness to be aware of itself, if not for the power inherent in awareness to be aware of itself. And it is spoken of as that relationship between Prakasha and Vimarsha. The Prakasha and Vimarsha, it's the relationship between Shiva and Shakti. It is Shakti who animates Shiva, becoming aware of its own power. Shiva is animated. And then Shakti is all that there is. In other words, we can now trace all the categories in its spontaneous unfoldment, one giving birth to another. And as soon as it's giving birth to another, it conceals the previous stage. Just as in the blossoming of the almond, soon as the blossoms flew away, the way is given to the next phase of the formation of the fruit. And you cannot have the formation of the fruit with the blossom intact. In the way that almond matures on a tree, the green husks also cracks open when the chance and opportunity for the hard shell has been developed hard enough, then there's no need for that green husk. So each stage of the unfoldment of the preceding categories conceals the previous category. This is very, very important, because this, in a way, how the Tantric doctrines and philosophy explains why can awareness and how can awareness be oblivious to its state of utter purity, whilst at the same time remaining nothing other than that, the state of original purity. In other words, Shiva, as it were, is concealed by his own power. On one hand, the self-awareness is the quality of Shakti. So there will be no way to be aware of itself. But as the Shakti vibrates and everything set in motion, all the frequencies that are nothing other than vibrant power of Shiva, concealing Shiva from its own nature. So down to the what is spoken of as gross categories of creation, down to all the sensory perceptions, down to the physical structure which is created for that end to find its conclusive expression through the equipment of the body with the organs of cognition at the disposal of the senses. So Tantra insists that there is nothing other than Shiva. And Shakti carries the creation, takes care of everything. So though Shiva as awareness seems to be concealed, in fact, it cannot be concealed because it illumines every act. Absolutely all of them without exception. Even the sense of touch when the hand brushes against the fabric or an open skin, the sensation that it produced, that is registered, is illumined by the power of Shiva to be aware of itself. So in other words, this is an analogy for you to contemplate that unity is never lost. Unity is all there is. So the conversation that we had earlier before is nothing but a speculation. There is not a moment when duality ever set in. There is simply no duality. It appears as if, but it's always oneness. Because if we have properly understood, it is all. The power of Shiva as Shakti. The power of Shiva as Shakti for infinite ways for self-expression. And that infinite way for self-expression, here now when we speak from this perspective that we have right now, is the marble of creation of the human body, where it can cognize. It can cognize and enjoy that what is known as this life, this physical existence, this embodied existence, whilst remaining nothing other than awareness. And the whole job of a spiritual aspirant, or the whole enterprise and the whole undertaking, is to realize that. In other words, all the talks about coming and going, all this appearance of an individual being, all these are, if you will, in the domain of what it only seems like, not what it seems. It's due to the principle or a category of Shakti herself. And Tantra has a very specific understanding of Maya. Maya is the power of Shakti, which is the power of Shiva, to conceal itself completely and entirely. And this is where the distinction between the pure categories and the categories that are ensued from their own and become the creation as we know it. The creation that can be studied. The creation that can be analyzed, scrutinized, talked about endlessly. It only happens from that level and at that level, at the level of the Maya. Like we're looking into the space, for example, open space with the Hubble telescope. It was not enough because there's an atmosphere of Earth, right? So we launched the Hubble telescope onto one of its satellites so it can have much, much greater clarity. And it takes 1 year for one shot of the universe from distant corner to be downloaded. And there's what essentially happening is that we're not looking into some kind of, another realm. What we're looking at, essentially, is consciousness looking at itself in the realm and in the domain of Maya. And this is where it's so interesting that this is what the quantum physics find the most perplexing. That if there was some faint hope with the development of astrophysics and quantum mechanics and quantum physics, when the astronomy was kind of like living its last days as a scientific discipline. Don't confuse astronomy in terms of the space programs and satellites, right? And all this exploration of space programs. This is more to do with engineering than with astrophysics, and the jobs are called thus. But the last faint hope that looking into space provides us with some answers about our origins have been refuted by some of the most outstanding physicists of our time, because it doesn't provide us with nothing. And I was a 30-year-old man at the Shivananda Yoga Ashram during the symposium, Consciousness is Our Shared Future, where some legendary figures at the time presented. One of them was Joe Maloney, Joe Maloney, the director of NASA at the time. There were many, many other people. Unknown to anyone, Amit Goswami, who's still working on his first book. Stephen Green, the founder of the Institute for Studying UFO, and many others. And I remember the presentation Maloney made with presenting us this opportunity to see that distant shot of a portion of the sky they found, which was completely pitch black. And this is where the Hubble telescope was zoomed in. It took 1 year for that shot to be downloaded. And when that shot was completely presented as the full picture, what it was is absolutely like a cluster upon cluster upon clusters of the stars. So that what was, even through all the other telescopes, seen and perceived as pitch black part of the sky where no other galaxies were in view. Once it was zoomed enough, it was nothing other than light bodies upon light bodies. And then what he supposed and presupposed, he said, imagine if we are to look and keep looking, and we, let's say, have the device one day that we can actually be able to, because probably all of you know, any crash course in astronomy will tell us that whenever we look into the distant light body, we're seeing the past. Right? Simply because the light travels. It even takes 7 minutes for the light of the sun to reach the retina of our eye. Right? So in other words, we always see a post factum of the sunset. We never see the actual reality. There's no such way as seeing the actual sunset. It doesn't exist. We see the picture on the retina of our eye of that which in that given moment in time doesn't exist. But it looks perfectly real, is it not? So likewise, the nearest star cluster, right? The nearest star, whatever that is, Cassiopea, right? Whatever, Alpha Centaurus. It takes some few million light years for its light. 4 years away still. 4 years before the light travels. But some further distant stars, million light ways. So developing that thought, Joe Maloney was saying that imagine we are able to keep looking and looking into the distant past, and this was at the time when the theory of the Big Bang was pretty much an accepted scientific perspective. So what he concluded his delivery was with, we're not going to be able to see a Big Bang. Instead, we will be looking at our own butt, staring into the lens of the bubble telescope. And this was, of course, to me, was a very, very telling metaphor, an example. That there is no such thing as looking into the past in terms of linear notion or concept of time. As also, at some point, there were these kind of hopes that there is indeed a possibility. This is just to give you an example. This is just an analogy. It's very interesting that the science actually is encountering its limitations. And at least what I have heard in some close circles in attending the science and non-duality conferences, that there are this new theme being unpacked. What it means, science in the age of quantum understanding. The science in the age of the observer. Is it even possible to observe universe as an independent phenomena? The straightforward answer from the quantum physics point of view, it's an impossibility. There is no such thing as an independent observer in its relationship to what is being observed. This is the very principle of the quantum physics, the departure that physics made, the science made, since the days of the quantum mechanics, since the days of the double-slit experiment, which is taught at the elementary schools as the most telling example of what is the nature of waves and particles. And Einstein used to pride himself that his greatest achievement was not for what he is known for and for what he received his accolades and awards for, but for suggesting that the light of the sun exhibits qualities of both waves and particles. How does that sit with Shiva Shakti theme? It squarely connects and relates, if you only ponder on that yourself. Reality is simultaneously Prakasha and Vimarsha at all times. And that relationship is observable absolutely everywhere simply because the process of observation would not be possible if something is not illumines that observation itself. And it illumined not from without, but from within. And we can even suggest that the relationship we have with ourselves could be given that same analogy of waves versus particles. So in other words, we are simultaneously something which has the quality of particles, something, if you will, particular, made out of cells, made out of matter. But in reality, it's nothing other than waves. Waves upon waves upon waves upon waves. It appears as having existence, solidity in space-time. But in fact, it's nothing other than waves. What are these waves? These are the vibratory qualities of Shakti. It's the throb of Shiva. So, therefore, the universe is spoken here of as the ocean of sound. And in that ocean of sound, whatever appears as solid, it's nothing other than sound, nothing other than waves. And this is why spiritual methodologies utilize and operate the spiritual methodologies that have existed and still exist in certain traditions, but certainly existed in many perennial traditions, where that realization that everything is made out of light and sound could be found as the foundational to these teachings. And of course, it is experientially available. In other words, proof of the pudding here is verified through direct cognition of that. So this phenomenon of existing as body, it's only in the domain of what is known as Maya. But Maya in Tantra is not spoken of as an illusion or as something which is sometimes considered as hallucinogenic or hallucinogenary power, that it simply doesn't even exist to begin with. It's not real, totally ephemeral. Tantra simply recognizes this and reconciles that as the power of Shakti. And Shakti always real, because Shakti is Shiva. Therefore, when we trace all the categories from the categories which together compose and made this world available to sensory perceptions, perceivable through sensory perceptions, all the way down to the single category, nowhere the sense of duality sets in. Why that is? Because everything is made out of these threads of awareness and its power to be aware of itself. Therefore, Shiva, awareness, is in every grain of creation, in every sound and in every grain of creation. And Shakti is what animates it all. So this is, if you will, a monistic perspective. Duality has never set in. There is no such thing as duality. All this is nothing other than your own awareness. All this is nothing other than I am. And every one of you can say that. All this is nothing other than yourself. It appears as many, but indeed is nothing other than one. And it's not just one as an abstract one in relation to nothing. It is the most intimate, directly perceivable reality of your own self. So in other words, it's not even something abstract as a category to believe in. It's not a kind of ideology that one carries through as a loftiest concept. It's a reality of everyday existence. Just as I said, when the hand touches something, it's there and then a confirmation of union with the disunion. Every time there is a contact of the senses with sense object, that union is recreated there and then, because it is there for that sake. So in other words, the gross or the grossest level of creation, it's the final level of creation. In fact, this is where Shiva can truly play sport. This is where everything comes into its fullness. Where everything comes into its fullness. Just as in that ancient Upanishadic chant, Purnamada Purnamidam. This absolute is full. This relative is full. And so it goes. From fullness, fullness comes into being. By fullness it is being sustained. And in what remains is nothing other than fullness. So all the talks about fragmented reality are nothing but categories of the language. Reality was never fragmented, it cannot be fragmented. Everything exists precisely because of unity. Everything is held by unity. Everything is unity. And into unity it returns. At any moment, at any point. Realization of that sets one free. When that is realized and cognized, one is free. One is known as being free. Healed. Freed from transmigratory existence in a sense of fluctuating between the extremes of separation. There's no separation anymore. One moves in unity and one sits still in unity. Everything is the domain of Shakti. Everything is Shakti. And Shakti is Shiva. There's nothing in creation that is not an expression of Shakti. So this is the relationship between Shiva and Shakti.